For 8 years, my marriage to Vanessa had been like that. We built a life together, 2 kids, a beautiful house in a quiet suburb of Austin. My work as an architect kept me busy, designing structures that would outlast us both, while Vanessa, with her impeccable sense of style and social charm, had carved out a niche for herself as an influencer. Our lives intertwined in a way that looked perfect from the outside. We played the part of the ideal couple, and for a while, I believed it myself. But routines, when disrupted, reveal cracks you didn't know existed. It started subtly. Vanessa had always been attached to her phone. It's her job, after all, but there was something different about it now. The device became an extension of her hand, a constant presence at the dinner table, in bed, even during what used to be our quiet moments. And then came the texts, silent, except for the discreet vibration. She'd glance at the screen, smile in a way that wasn't meant for me, and lock it before I could even ask. I didn't want to be that guy. The paranoid husband, the one who jumps to conclusions over a few extra texts or a more meticulous than usual makeup routine before heading out. But the late nights? That's what really got to me. For years, the only late nights Vanessa ever had were the ones where she'd binge-watch reality shows on Netflix, laughing at the absurdity of other people's lives. Now, there were meetings, important ones, she'd say, with potential brand partners at the country club of all places. It was strange because, for as long as I've known her, Vanessa had never set foot on a golf course. And yet, suddenly, she couldn't get enough of it. Workouts at the club, casual meetings with fitness enthusiasts, mingling with the high-end clients who frequented the greens. At first, I didn't question it. People evolve, right? We all pick up new hobbies. But then I started noticing a pattern. Josh Edwards. The first time I heard his name, it was in passing. Vanessa mentioned him as her trainer, someone who worked at the club and had helped her get into a new fitness regimen. A golf instructor? Teaching her fitness? It didn't add up, but I brushed it off. She had always been vague about the people she worked with, so I didn't press. But the texts kept coming. J. Those initials started showing up frequently on her screen. Every time that phone buzzed, her face lit up with a smile that wasn't meant for me. One night, I walked in on her, sitting in the living room, barely paying attention to the reality show she claimed to be watching. She was typing away, her fingers dancing across the screen. When she saw me, the phone snapped shut, and she looked up with an all-too-innocent smile. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Oh, just Sarah," she said, naming one of her friends from the influencer world. "We're planning a collaboration." I nodded, but the unease gnawed at me. I let it go, but my instincts wouldn't. You don't stay married for 8 years without learning to read someone's behavior. And Vanessa's had shifted in ways she didn't realize I could see. There was a lightness about her when she thought I wasn't watching, a giddy excitement that she never used to hide from me. And every time I brought it up, why the sudden obsession with the country club, the new fitness routines, the extra meetings, she brushed me off with a wave and a laugh. "Come on, Aaron, I'm trying to stay in shape. Don't tell me you're turning into one of those insecure husbands." She was good at deflecting, always had been, but I'm not stupid. Over time, the pieces started falling into place. It was one of those nights when she came home late, far too late for a simple meeting, that I made up my mind. She smelled like expensive wine, not the kind we kept at home. I asked how her night went, and she answered with that same chirpy tone, but there was a glint in her eyes, a flicker of something hidden. I waited until she fell asleep before I picked up her phone from her nightstand. Locked, of course. Vanessa had never locked her phone before. I put it back quietly, but in my head, the suspicion was hardening into something darker. It was time to find out the truth. The next day, I went to work, but my mind wasn't on the project in front of me. I couldn't focus. Instead, I kept replaying the scenes in my head. Her smile, the secrecy, the late nights. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked my boss, Gregory, for some time off, telling him I needed to deal with some personal matters. Gregory, ever the understanding type, didn't ask questions. "You take care of what you need, Aaron. The project can wait," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I thanked him, already forming a plan in my mind. By the end of the day, I was at the electronics store, dropping a small fortune on surveillance gear. Cameras, microphones, a setup that would let me monitor every corner of my own home without raising suspicion. If Vanessa was planning something, I was going to find out. I wasn't just going to accuse her without proof. No, I wanted to see it for myself, catch her in the act if I had to. That evening, I told her I had a business trip coming up, just a quick overnight thing a couple of hours away. She barely looked up from her phone, which didn't help the growing knot in my stomach. Instead of leaving the next morning, I called my boss again, confirming I needed a bit more time, and stayed home while she went off to her meeting at the country club. Once she was gone, I got to work. I spent the next few hours setting up the cameras in strategic places: the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, and yes, even the bathroom. If she was bringing someone into our home, I wasn't going to miss it. By the time she came back that afternoon, I had everything in place. She didn't seem to notice anything different, but I watched her more closely than ever. Every glance at her phone, every casual smile, it all seemed loaded now, as if she were hiding something in plain sight. That night, while she slept next to me, her breathing steady and peaceful, I scrolled through the footage on my laptop. Nothing suspicious yet, just her moving around the house, but I was patient. I knew it was only a matter of time. And then the next day it happened. She was in the kitchen, making small talk at breakfast, unusually chirpy again. I had already told her I'd be leaving for the trip that afternoon, and she seemed almost too excited for me to go. Later, when she thought I wasn't around, I overheard her on the phone, whispering in the hallway, "Tomorrow night's perfect. He'll be gone." I froze. The words echoed in my head. "He'll be gone." I leaned in closer, straining to catch more of the conversation. "We'll have the place to ourselves," she whispered, the giddy tone unmistakable. "Don't worry, Josh. I'll make sure everything's ready." My blood ran cold. So it was him, Josh Edwards, the golf instructor. The pieces clicked together in my mind, each one more damning than the last. But I didn't confront her then. No, I needed to be smart about this. Blowing up in anger would give her time to cover her tracks, to spin some story and make me look like the bad guy. Instead, I played it cool. I kissed her on the cheek that afternoon, packed my bag like nothing was wrong, and left for my trip. Except I didn't go far. I checked into a hotel about 10 minutes away from home, set up my laptop, and waited. I wasn't going to miss a single second of what was coming. The hotel room was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and lingers. I sat there in the half-lit room, the blue glow of my laptop the only source of warmth. The live feed from the cameras was already running, each angle showing me every inch of the house I had so meticulously wired earlier. It was strange, watching my own home from a distance, detached from the place I had shared with Vanessa for years. But tonight, it wasn't our home. It was a stage. I checked the time, still early. Vanessa had texted me a couple of hours ago, wishing me a safe trip. I'd replied with the obligatory, "Thanks, love you too," the words tasting bitter in my mouth as I hit send. It was almost pathetic how easily the lies slid out now on both sides. But I needed to play my part, to maintain the illusion that I was miles away, distracted by work, while she prepared for her night of betrayal. My phone vibrated on the table. I glanced down. Gregory. I ignored the call. He probably just wanted to check in about work, maybe discuss an upcoming project, but tonight I didn't care. This was personal, and I wasn't going to let anything interfere. I turned my attention back to the screen. Vanessa had been out when I left, no doubt making final arrangements with Josh for their evening. I watched the empty living room for a while, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the hotel air conditioning. The stillness made the waiting harder. I wanted the confirmation now, to see it with my own eyes. But I'd learned patience over the years, and tonight, I'd need every ounce of it. After what felt like an eternity, Vanessa finally appeared on the screen, walking into the kitchen. She moved with a kind of nervous energy, checking her phone, glancing at the clock, clearly anticipating his arrival. I had to give it to her. She played the part of a faithful wife well enough when I was around, but now that she thought I was gone, the mask slipped. She started preparing dinner, pulling out ingredients from the fridge. I smiled to myself, knowing what she was about to consume. That little dose of revenge I'd slipped into her dinner would take effect soon enough, and when it did, her evening would unravel in a way she couldn't control. As she cooked, I watched every movement, my fingers tapping impatiently on the hotel desk. She hummed softly, not the least bit aware that she was being watched. The surveillance cameras caught everything. The way she kept glancing at her phone, the text she probably sent to Josh to confirm the plan. Then, as expected, the doorbell rang. I leaned in closer to the laptop, eyes fixed on the screen as Vanessa rushed to the front door, smoothing out her clothes and running a hand through her hair one last time. It was almost laughable, the way she tried to present herself, as if she were a schoolgirl preparing for a date rather than a wife sneaking behind her husband's back. When she opened the door, Josh stood there, every bit the smug, arrogant bastard I'd imagined. He wore a crisp polo shirt and designer jeans, clearly trying to look casual, but his intention was written all over his face. He carried a bottle of wine, a mid-range brand, nothing too expensive, just enough to set the tone he wanted. It was like I was watching a low-budget romance play out in real time. "Hey you," Vanessa greeted him with a smile, stepping aside to let him in. "Hey yourself," he replied smoothly, his eyes scanning the room as he walked in. "Place looks great." "Thanks," Vanessa said, closing the door behind him. "I've been cleaning up all afternoon." They made small talk as they moved into the living room, pouring wine, exchanging awkward compliments. I watched them settle in on the couch, laughing softly, their voices muffled through the microphone but clear enough to understand. It was a strange feeling hearing them like this, so casual, so comfortable, as if they'd done this 100 times before. But the real show was about to start. Vanessa had barely finished her first glass of wine when I noticed her shifting in her seat. At first it was subtle, a small movement, a slight discomfort. But then she shifted again, crossing her legs and pressing her lips together in a way I recognized. She was trying to hide it, but I knew exactly what was happening. The laxative was kicking in. She excused herself, standing up a little too quickly and flashing Josh an apologetic smile. "Be right back," she said, heading toward the bathroom. Josh didn't seem to think much of it at first. He stayed on the couch, sipping his wine, glancing around the living room like he was already making himself at home. I could see him scrolling through his phone, probably waiting for Vanessa to return so they could get back to their little seduction game. But Vanessa wasn't coming back anytime soon. I switched the camera feed to the bathroom, and there she was, her face pale, her posture rigid as she sat on the toilet. From the way she was gripping the counter, it was clear that this wasn't going to be a quick trip. The look on her face was priceless, a mix of panic and embarrassment, and I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. By the time she returned to the living room, Josh was still lounging on the couch, looking mildly impatient. Vanessa sat back down next to him, trying to act casual, but her discomfort was obvious. She kept shifting, her smile strained, her posture stiff. They tried to talk again, but the conversation was forced, the mood clearly not what either of them had expected. Then it happened again. Vanessa's face tightened, and before Josh could even say anything, she bolted up from the couch, muttering another apology as she darted back to the bathroom. This time, Josh frowned, looking more annoyed than concerned. He checked his watch, then his phone, probably wondering what the hell was going on. I was loving every second of it. The third time Vanessa rushed out of the room, Josh's patience wore thin. He stood up, glancing toward the hallway with a scowl. He paced for a minute, then picked up his phone, typing out a message before putting it back in his pocket. I switched back to the living room camera, watching as he sat down again, his mood shifting from irritation to outright frustration. Vanessa, meanwhile, was stuck in the bathroom, her night falling apart in the most spectacular way. She knew something was wrong, but there was no way she could salvage this now. Each time she tried to compose herself and return to the living room, her body betrayed her again, and she dashed back to the bathroom in a flurry of embarrassment. I had to hand it to Josh, though. He lasted longer than I expected. But eventually, even he couldn't ignore the fact that this wasn't going anywhere. When Vanessa returned from her latest trip, looking pale and defeated, Josh's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen, his frown deepening. Gotta go," he said, standing up abruptly. "Work's calling." "Wait already?" Vanessa asked, clearly desperate to salvage something from the disaster of a night. "Yeah," Josh muttered, grabbing his jacket from the back of the couch. "They need me to cover a shift tomorrow morning. Early." Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but before she could say anything, Josh was already heading for the door. He muttered a quick goodbye, not even bothering to kiss her, and left without another word. The front door closed behind him with a sharp click, leaving Vanessa standing alone in the living room, looking like the wind had been knocked out of her. I sat back in my hotel chair, watching as Vanessa sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. She had no idea what had hit her, no clue that the entire evening had been orchestrated by me. And now, she was left with nothing, just the cold reality of what she had tried to do and the mess she had made of it. The drive back to the house felt longer than usual, though it was only 10 minutes. I hadn't slept. Not really. How could I? After watching the night's debacle unfold in the most satisfying, twisted way imaginable. My mind was too sharp, too focused on what was coming next, the moment I'd been planning for, the moment I would finally face Vanessa and let her see that the game was over. I wasn't going to let her squirm her way out of this. Not this time. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her car parked in its usual spot. There was no sign that anything had happened the night before. It was almost surreal to think that just hours ago, she'd been in that very house with another man, playing out whatever fantasy they thought they could indulge in behind my back. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door, knowing that on the other side of it was the beginning of the end. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and headed inside. The house was quiet, too quiet, almost like the calm before a storm. Vanessa was in the kitchen, predictably pretending like everything was normal. She was standing at the counter, flipping through her phone, sipping coffee like it was just another day. Her back was to me, and for a moment, I just watched her. The normalcy of it all was almost laughable. She had no idea what was about to hit her. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down by the door with a little more force than necessary. She turned, her face lighting up with a smile that looked too practiced, too perfect. "Hey, you're back early. How was the trip?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past her straight to the living room. My silence must have tipped her off because she followed me, her smile faltering. I could feel her eyes on me, probably wondering if something was wrong, if she had slipped up somewhere. Little did she know, she'd been slipping from the start. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady cold. There was no point in beating around the bush. The moment had come. I turned to face her. She stood by the kitchen entrance, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a nervous flicker in her eyes. She sensed it. Something was off. Good. Let her feel it. Let her stew in it for just a second longer. "Aaron, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice trying to sound casual, but there was a slight tremor there. She set the coffee cup down, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her shirt. "I know about Josh," I said, cutting straight to the point. Her face went pale instantly, like the blood had drained from it all at once. It was almost satisfying, watching the realization hit her. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She tried again, stumbling over her words. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, eyes darting to the floor, then back to me, searching for some way to escape this. "Don't," I said sharply, holding up a hand to stop her. "Just don't. I've seen everything." "Seen what?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. But it was too late for that. "The text, the footage, all of it," I said, my tone cold, detached. "I know you brought him here last night. I know what you planned." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I could see her brain racing, trying to figure out how to respond, how to salvage this. But there was no way out now. She was cornered, and she knew it. "Aaron," she began, her voice soft, pleading. It's not what you think. Nothing happened. I swear, nothing happened with him." I almost laughed at that. Nothing happened? She didn't even know how much I had seen. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, just to watch her squirm. She took a step toward me, her hands reaching out like she was about to touch my arm. But I stepped back, making it clear that I wasn't buying a single word she said. "You didn't sleep with him," I said, my voice flat, matter of fact. "Because you spent most of the night running to the bathroom." Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened slightly in shock. She knew in that moment that I had been watching the entire time. I wasn't just guessing. I had seen everything. How did you?" she started, but the words trailed off as the weight of the situation settled on her. "I installed cameras," I said simply. "In the house. The living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. Everywhere you thought you were safe to do whatever it is you thought you could get away with." Her hands flew to her face, and the tears started immediately. She was good at that, turning on the waterworks when she needed to manipulate a situation. But this time it wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to let her play the victim. Not after everything I'd seen. "Aaron, please," she sobbed, her voice shaking. "I was stupid, I know. I've been feeling so alone lately, and you've been so distant with work. I wasn't thinking. It was a mistake. I swear, nothing serious happened between me and Josh. I swear I never slept with him. Please, you have to believe me." I stared at her, the tears falling freely now as she babbled on about loneliness and mistakes. But I didn't feel anything, not anger, not sadness, just a cold detachment. I wasn't here for her excuses. I had already made my decision. "It doesn't matter," I said, cutting through her sobbing explanation. "What matters is what you planned. You lied to me, and you thought you could bring him into our home." She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, but I wasn't finished. "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said. "I'm filing for divorce." Her head shot up at that, the panic in her eyes growing even more intense. "No, Aaron, please don't. We can fix this, I know we can. I'll do anything. Please don't throw away everything we've built." I took a deep breath, watching her as she pleaded with me, her desperation growing with every word. And then I dropped the bomb that I knew would break her completely. "I control the finances, Vanessa," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "The house, the investments, it's all under my name. You walk away from this, you walk away with nothing. No money, no assets, and certainly no reputation." She froze, her tear-streaked face staring at me in disbelief. "And if you fight me on this," I continued, "if you try to drag this out, I'll release the footage. Every single minute of it. Your career as an influencer? It'll be over. No one will want to work with you when they know you invited another man into your home while your husband was away." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She was trapped, and she knew it. "Aaron, please. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was stupid. I love you. I didn't want to lose you. We can work this out. We can fix it." "No," I said, my voice cold and final. "We're done." She broke down completely then, sobbing uncontrollably on the couch, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. I turned away, leaving her there to drown in her own mess. The divorce papers were already in motion, and there was nothing left to discuss. As I walked toward the door, I stopped, turning back to face her one last time. "You've got until the end of the week to pack your things and get out," I said, my tone as icy as the room had become. "If you're not gone by then, I'll throw your stuff out myself." And with that, I left her there, the house heavy with the weight of her sobbing. There was no satisfaction, no relief, just a cold, quiet finality. The courthouse had a strange, sterile feel to it. The polished floors, the muted gray walls, the faint hum of distant voices. It was all so clinical, like a waiting room for people whose lives were falling apart. I sat in the small conference room next to Madison, my lawyer, while we waited for Vanessa and her legal team to arrive. Madison was calm, flipping through the file she'd put together on my case. She had a laser-like focus that made her invaluable. I wasn't nervous, not exactly. I had prepared for this moment meticulously, had every piece of evidence lined up, but there was always that gnawing feeling in the back of my mind, a sliver of doubt that anything could happen in court. "You've got this, Aaron," Madison said, not even looking up from the file. "The evidence speaks for itself. She won't have a leg to stand on." I nodded, though the tension hadn't left me. "I know. I just don't want her trying to manipulate this any further. You know she's going to play the victim." "Let her," Madison replied smoothly. "We're prepared. Besides, her lawyer's reputation for bullying settlements won't work with us." Madison had been my rock through this whole ordeal, ever since the day I walked into her office with my story and the evidence to back it up. She had wasted no time tearing through the details, already anticipating the ways Vanessa would try to twist things. She was ruthless, and that's exactly what I needed. The door clicked open, and in walked Vanessa. She looked different now, tired, haggard even. The confidence she usually carried herself with was gone. replaced with something hollow. Behind her trailed Tyler, her lawyer. He was every bit the slick, cocky figure I expected him to be, with his expensive suit and air of arrogance. He gave me a brief, condescending nod before sitting down across from us, flashing a charming smile that had no real warmth. Well, Aaron, he began, his tone too casual for my liking. It's unfortunate we had to meet under these circumstances. Madison barely acknowledged him, her eyes trained on the documents in front of her. Let's skip the pleasantries, Tyler, she said coolly. We both know why we're here. Vanessa avoided my gaze, focusing on the legal pad in front of her like it was the most interesting thing in the world. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how this was going to play out. She knew she was in trouble. The only question was how much. Tyler cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair, as though he were perfectly at ease. Vanessa is willing to work with you on the settlement. We don't need to make this any uglier than it already is. Madison raised an eyebrow. Work with us? You mean after everything she's done? The affair? The reckless behavior around the children? Tyler's smile never wavered. Aaron's use of hidden cameras to spy on his wife. In his own home, Madison interrupted smoothly. Which, as you know, is perfectly legal in the state of Texas. The footage is admissible. Tyler's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. That's up for debate. It's really not, Madison shot back, her voice firm. What's up for debate is how Vanessa's conduct affected the stability of this family. We're prepared to present not only the surveillance footage but also the text messages between her and Josh, and the financial records that show she was siphoning money out of their accounts to fund her little escapades. Vanessa's head snapped up at that, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected that. The cracks in her composure were starting to show. Tyler frowned, glancing at Vanessa before turning back to us. Financial records? That's a stretch, don't you think? Madison pulled out a stack of papers from the file, sliding them across the table toward Tyler. Not a stretch at all. We've got bank statements showing multiple small transactions to a separate account Vanessa opened without Aaron's knowledge. Gifts, travel expenses, all linked to her relationship with Josh. She's been bleeding their joint account for months. I saw the color drain from Vanessa's face as Tyler flipped through the documents, his confident demeanor cracking. He clearly hadn't been prepared for this. He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before turning back to Madison. We could argue. You could try, Madison interrupted again. But you'd lose. This is ironclad. Vanessa's behavior is reckless and irresponsible. Aaron has been the stable parent here. Full custody is our aim, and with this evidence, it's well within our grasp. Vanessa let out a soft gasp, finally finding her voice. Aaron, please, this isn't fair. You're twisting things. I wasn't stealing from you. I just needed some space. I was confused, and I cut her off, keeping my voice steady. Confused? You took money from our accounts to fund gifts and trips for another man. You lied, cheated, and brought him into our home. You put our kids in the middle of your mess. This isn't about space, Vanessa. It's about accountability. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed to fail her. Instead, she sat there, blinking away tears, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing between us. The smirk he had walked in with was gone now, replaced with a look of frustration. He knew the tide had turned, and there was little he could do to regain control. We're willing to settle, he said finally, his voice quieter now, more measured. Let's be reasonable. No one wants to drag this through the courts and damage everyone involved, especially the children. Madison leaned forward slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. We are being reasonable, Tyler. This settlement isn't just about money. It's about protecting the children. Aaron wants full custody, and given Vanessa's behavior, that's what we're prepared to fight for. Vanessa's eyes widened in panic. No, please, Aaron, don't do this. I love them. I'm their mother, and I'm their father, I said, my voice like ice. A father who has been there, providing stability while you've been sneaking around with Josh, siphoning money, and making a mess of everything. You've shown that you can't be trusted with their well-being. Tyler's frustration was palpable now, his hands clenching as he flipped through the documents Madison had handed him. He knew he was losing. Vanessa looked close to tears, but this time, there was no sympathy from me. She had brought this on herself. "We can negotiate the details of visitation," Madison added, her tone final. "But full custody remains non-negotiable. As for the financial settlement, Vanessa's siphoning of funds will be factored into the division of assets. We're also prepared to file a motion to freeze all joint accounts until this is resolved." Tyler hesitated, glancing at Vanessa one last time before finally nodding. "We'll need some time to review these documents further, but we'll discuss a settlement." "Take your time," Madison replied, leaning back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We'll be ready whenever you are." The meeting ended with Tyler leading Vanessa out of the room, her face pale and her steps unsteady. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a cold, hard resolve. This was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and now it was time to see who would come out on top. Madison packed up her files, glancing at me. "That went well." I nodded. "Better than expected." She smiled slightly, standing up and giving me a nod of approval. "Let's finish this." And as I followed her out of the room, I knew that I would. I'd spent the last few weeks securing my position, and now it was time to take the final step, bring Josh into the storm. The legal battle with Vanessa was moving in my favor, but it wasn't enough. I wanted Josh to feel the weight of what he'd done. He wasn't just some bystander caught in my marriage's collapse. He was part of the destruction, and it was time he faced the consequences. Sabrina was my next move. I had considered it carefully. Josh's wife, Sabrina, was a well-known figure at the country club. She had the kind of social presence that made people gravitate toward her, always hosting events, mingling with the right circles, throwing charity galas that had their pictures in the local magazines. A perfect life on the surface. Just like mine had been, I wondered how much of that perfect image was about to crumble when she saw the truth. I didn't relish the idea of dragging her into this, but I knew one thing. Josh didn't deserve the protection of silence. Sabrina had to know, and if she did what I thought she would, it could break Josh's little charade wide open. I waited until I was back at the office, where things felt more controlled, more manageable. Gregory had given me a wide berth, knowing I was dealing with personal matters, but I could sense he wanted to ask questions. He hadn't. Not yet, anyway. Sitting behind my desk, I stared at Sabrina's contact information on the screen. It wasn't hard to find. People like her left digital trails everywhere. I tapped out a quick message. Straight to the point. No need for subtlety. "Sabrina, this is Aaron. I need to talk to you about Josh. It's urgent." I hit send and leaned back, waiting. It didn't take long. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. "Aaron? What's this about? I don't understand." I stared at her reply for a second before responding. "It's about Josh and Vanessa. I have evidence of their affair. We should meet." The line of text sat on the screen like a bomb, waiting to go off. I knew this would be a turning point for her, just as it had been for me. The question was how she'd handle it. A minute later, her response came through. "I don't believe you." Where and when? Not a denial, not an excuse, just pure disbelief. I couldn't blame her, but I had everything she needed to see. I suggested a cafe on the edge of town, a place where no one from the club would casually drop by. She agreed. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where people went to disappear for a while. I picked a booth in the corner away from the main windows, the kind of spot where we wouldn't be interrupted. Sabrina arrived right on time, stepping in with her sunglasses perched on her head, dressed like she was ready for an afternoon at the club. She spotted me almost immediately, her expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. She didn't sit right away, hovering by the table as if waiting for some sort of explanation. "Aaron," she said slowly, her voice tight. "What's this all about?" I motioned to the seat across from me. "Please sit down." She hesitated for a moment before sliding into the booth, her eyes never leaving mine. "You've got about 5 minutes before I decide whether or not I should walk out of here." "I'm not going to waste your time, Sabrina," I said calmly, pulling out the envelope I had prepared earlier. "I have proof that Josh and Vanessa have been having an affair. I thought you should know." Her eyes flicked to the envelope on the table, but didn't touch it. "What kind of proof?" "Text messages, surveillance footage," I said, keeping my voice steady. I caught them. It's all in here. For a long moment, she just stared at the envelope, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the denial, the fear, the anger. It was the same feeling I'd had when the pieces had first started falling into place for me. "You're sure?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I wouldn't be sitting here if I wasn't," I replied. "You don't have to open it now, but you deserve the truth. I'm not asking you to do anything about it, Sabrina. I just thought you should know." Her hands finally reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling as she slid it across the table. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she sat there, staring at it as if the truth inside would somehow change if she waited long enough. "When?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For a while now," I said, leaning back. "Long enough that it wasn't some random mistake." She closed her eyes briefly, swallowing hard before nodding. "And Vanessa?" "She didn't deny it," I said quietly. "She tried to justify it. Said she was confused. Lonely." Sabrina let out a bitter laugh. "Lonely? That's the excuse, isn't it?" I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She opened the envelope then, her hands moving more steadily now. I watched as her eyes flicked over the documents, the screenshots of text messages, the stills from the surveillance footage. Her face remained expressionless, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the tightness in her shoulders. By the time she finished, she folded the papers back into the envelope with a deliberate calmness that felt unnatural. "I didn't think," she began, but her voice broke off, trailing into silence. She pressed her lips together, taking a deep breath. "I thought Josh was loyal." "I did too," I said, my tone flat. "I thought Vanessa was faithful." Sabrina sat back, shaking her head slowly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "But there's more." Her eyes snapped back to mine, the confusion deepening. "More?" I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "Josh has been using his position at the club to meet women. It wasn't just Vanessa. I've looked into it. There have been others." Her face paled at that, the calm facade cracking just enough for me to see the shock behind her eyes. "You're sure?" "Positive," I said. "It wasn't hard to find. A few inquiries at the club, some digging through his social media connections. It's all there." She sat there, stunned, for what felt like an eternity, her fingers curling around the edge of the table as if steadying herself. I let the silence hang between us, knowing this was a lot for her to take in. I had been there myself, right where she was now, trying to process the reality that everything she thought she knew about her life had been a lie. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes cold, calculating. "I need to think." "Of course," I said, standing up. "Take all the time you need." "But Sabrina, you know as well as I do, Josh isn't going to stop. Not unless someone makes him." She nodded stiffly, her face unreadable as she gathered her things. She stood and walked out of the cafe without another word, leaving the envelope sitting on the table. I didn't follow her. She would make her move when she was ready. A few days later, I got the call. Sabrina had confronted Josh. He had denied it, of course, lied through his teeth, tried to weasel his way out of it like I knew he would. But she had cornered him with the evidence, the cold, hard proof that left no room for his slippery excuses. I could hear the weariness in her voice as she told me the story, how Josh had tried to turn it around on her, accuse her of being paranoid, how she'd watched his panic grow as she revealed what she knew. It was almost too familiar. By the end of that conversation, she had made her decision. Sabrina was filing for divorce. Not only that, but she was going to the club's management with everything. She didn't care if it caused a scandal. She was done protecting his reputation. She was done being the dutiful wife while he played his little games. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction as I hung up the phone. Josh's world was about to implode, and this time, there was no escape for him. He wouldn't just lose Sabrina. He'd lose his job, his social standing, everything he had built on lies and manipulation. The courtroom felt colder than I remembered. The high ceilings, the marble floors, and the quiet echo of footsteps reverberating through the hall gave it an eerie sense of finality. I sat beside Madison, who had been flipping through her notes with the same calm precision she always had. This was just another case to her, another battle she was about to win. For me, it was the end of an era, the end of the life I had known with Vanessa. I glanced toward the other side of the room where Vanessa sat with her lawyer, Tyler. She looked different now, thinner, pale, and worn down. Gone was the confident, polished woman who could charm a crowd with a smile or a well-placed social media post. Now, she was just someone hanging onto the remnants of what her life used to be, and those remnants were slipping away, bit by bit. Tyler whispered something to her, but Vanessa didn't seem to register it. Her eyes flicked toward me once, and I saw a flash of something, regret, maybe, but it was too late for that. The damage was done, and we were here to sort through the wreckage. Everything is in place, Madison said quietly beside me, barely looking up from her file. We've got this. I nodded, though I already knew that. The case had been stacked in my favor from the beginning. The evidence we had collected, the surveillance footage, the financial documents showing Vanessa's misuse of our joint accounts. It was all airtight. Tyler had tried to chip away at it, but Madison was always 10 steps ahead. And now, here we were at the final hearing where the judge would issue his ruling. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered, taking his seat at the bench. The tension in the room thickened. This was it. The judge began speaking, summarizing the case, acknowledging the evidence we had presented and the claims made by both sides. I watched Vanessa out of the corner of my eye. She was fidgeting, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her lawyer, Tyler, sat stoically beside her, but even he knew the outcome was inevitable. As it pertains to custody, the judge's voice echoed in the room. The court finds in favor of the petitioner, Aaron. Full custody of the children will be awarded to him. The words landed like a hammer, solid and final. Vanessa visibly flinched. Her hand shot up to cover her mouth, but she didn't speak. I kept my gaze steady, not allowing myself to feel any triumph just yet. There was still more to come. The division of assets, the judge continued, will reflect the findings of this court. The house, the majority of financial holdings, and primary investments will remain under Aaron's control. Given the evidence of financial misconduct on the part of Vanessa, her share of the remaining assets will be limited. Tyler stiffened, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. There was no room to. I could see Vanessa's shoulders shaking slightly, but she kept her face turned away from me. The ruling continued, but the weight of it was already clear. Everything was falling into place, just as Madison had predicted. I had won. Full custody of the kids, the house, and the financial stability that Vanessa had so recklessly jeopardized. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was the final nail in the coffin of what our life together had been. When the judge finished, there was a quiet murmur in the room. Madison turned to me, her expression unreadable, but there was a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. It's done, she said simply. I nodded, standing up slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment settle in. Vanessa remained seated, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. Tyler was speaking to her, probably giving her some empty reassurance, but it was clear that even he didn't believe it. Vanessa had lost, and she knew it. I walked out of the courtroom with Madison by my side, the echo of the ruling still ringing in my ears. It wasn't the kind of victory that left you feeling elated. It was the kind that left you drained, like you'd just survived a long and bitter war. But it was over. Finally, it was over. Back at the house, everything felt different. The quietness of it, the emptiness, it was no longer suffocating. Instead, it felt like a clean slate, like I could finally breathe again. The kids were with my parents for the weekend, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the house was mine. Vanessa had moved out the week before, her things packed into boxes and carted away by a moving company. I hadn't been there to watch her go. I didn't need to. But when I walked through the front door now, the absence of her presence was palpable. The house felt lighter, more spacious, as if the weight of everything she had brought with her, the lies, the betrayal, had finally lifted. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the backyard. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the trees, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Sabrina. It's done. I served him the papers today. He tried to talk his way out of it, of course. But I'm not listening anymore. I smiled grimly. Josh, ever the manipulator, trying to wriggle his way back into her life. But Sabrina was stronger than that. We both were now. I'm glad, il replied. He won't change. You deserve better. A moment later, she responded. So do you. We met up a few days later, a quiet cafe this time, away from the prying eyes of the club crowd. Sabrina looked lighter, freer, like she had finally shed the burden of pretending her life was something it wasn't. I knew the feeling. Everything's moving fast now, she said as we sat down. Divorce papers are filed. He's already lost his job at the club. I guess word got around about. Well, everything. I figured it would, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Guys like him always think they're untouchable. Until they're not. Sabrina gave a small, rueful smile. I just never thought it would get this messy. Life is a way of doing that, I replied, leaning back in my chair. But at least now, you're moving on. No more lies, no more pretending. She nodded, her gaze drifting out the window for a moment before turning back to me. And you? How are things with Vanessa? I shrugged. She's out of the house. The court gave me full custody. She's going to have a hard time recovering from all of this, especially with the financial settlement. Her influencer career, well, that's probably over. Sabrina arched an eyebrow. Good. She deserves it. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us absorbing the weight of what we'd been through. There was no need for flowery words or drawn-out conversations about betrayal and heartbreak. We both lived it, felt the sting of it, and now we were both on the other side. Survivors in a way. You know, Sabrina said after a moment, her voice softer, I never thought I'd end up here. Not just with Josh, but in general. Life has a funny way of knocking you off course, doesn't it? Yeah, I agreed. But sometimes it knocks you into something better. She smiled at that, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. I like that. We finished our coffee, talking about everything but the past, about new beginnings, about the freedom we now had to shape our own lives, free from the shadows of those who had betrayed us. It wasn't the kind of conversation that ended with promises or plans for the future. Just two people, sharing a moment of understanding, of solidarity. As I walked back to my car, the evening air crisp and clear, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The past was behind me now. The house was mine again. The kids were safe with me. And Vanessa, well, she would have to live with the choices she had made. The future was wide open. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.